Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second installment of Three Girls Meets the Raven Boys. So this is part of a 4-video series where Heather, Sarah from Sunset Bow Tarot, and we talk about the Raven Cycle series, which is a young adult fantasy series by Maggie Stiefvater, and make connections to the Raven's Prophecy Tarot, also created by Maggie Stiefvater. So the tarot is inspired by the series. So you don't necessarily need the series to use the deck. However, we do feel that knowing these stories does add a lot more depth and insight into a lot of these images. Spoiler alert, there will be spoilers.
Lots of them.
Lots.
Read the book. You probably shouldn't watch this video.
Exactly. Okay, so I will also leave a link to the first video that we did on the Raven Boys in relation to the deck. And this book is the second one, the Dream Thieves. So before we get started, Sarah, would you do us the honor of a very high-level summary of this second book?
Absolutely. And I think that for a lot of people, including me, and I think, Heather, you might have said this before too, that this is your favorite book in the series. This is my favorite book in the series. It's
really good.
It's so good. Okay, so the Dream Thieves, as you recall when we were talking about the last book, the Raven Cycle focuses on a number of characters, and several of them are boys. They are friends with each other. They all go to this school called Aglenby Academy, which is where the whole Raven theme comes from. So one of those boys is a character named Ronan Lynch, and Ronan is kind of a prickly character. He has a lot of difficult stuff in his past, and a lot of that becomes more clear over the course of this particular book. But basically what we learn about Ronan, and what becomes apparent literally in the last line of the previous book, is that Ronan has the ability to take items out of his dreams. So this is where the concept, the Dream Thieves, comes from. When he dreams, he can dream of objects or creatures or all kinds of things and take them out of his dreams and into reality. And what we learn is that this is actually a power that his family has had, like his father had. His father, who died under somewhat mysterious circumstances prior to the events of the whole series. And as a result of that, where Ronan comes from and the family that he comes from has been really shaped by this power. His dad was this just sort of disreputable Irish guy who somehow managed to be filthy rich and have this entire farm full of magical stuff. And we also discover that Ronan's mother was actually a dream product, that his dad actually dreamed his mom. And any creatures that his dad had dreamed, when his dad passes away, those creatures, or people, in the case of his mother, just go catatonic. Like they stop functionally, they still go on living, but they functionally stop having any personality or inner life or like brain function, basically. So in addition to that, Ronan's dad has, when he passed away, left a will that basically says that none of the brothers can go back to their family home or get back close to their mom or do any of those things after he has passed away. So Ronan has been living with Gansey all this time, has been unable to go home, like has this real chip on his shoulder about the whole thing. Understandably so, because he's in a state of deep pain. He doesn't get along with his eldest brother very well, and yeah, so he comes from a very, very difficult family background. What we also discover over the course of this book is that Ronan is gay, and he starts to have feelings for this super obnoxious other student at Aglenby Academy named Joseph Kavinsky, who he's just one of the, like, he does a lot of drugs. He's like super filthy rich, but in a, like, his dad might be in the Russian mafia kind of way. He keeps wrecking these super fancy racing cars and then magically gets the exact same car back the next day, and nobody knows how this happens. And basically what Ronan discovers about Kavinsky in the course of their sort of love-hate relationship is that Kavinsky is also somebody who can take objects out of his dreams. And so, but what Kavinsky takes out of his dreams is things more like really amazing designer drugs and these fancy racing cars that he always has and stuff like that. So they develop this relationship where Kavinsky teaches Ronan more about how to really control his own dreams and decide what he's going to bring out of them and have more control over that. But, you know, meanwhile, Kavinsky is this really like self-destructive force who, you know, he and Ronan end up, when Ronan somewhat rejects some of the things that Kavinsky does, Kavinsky develops a real sort of vendetta towards Ronan, and they end up, you know, having a big standoff at the end of the book, basically.
Showdown, yes.
Massive showdown. We will be talking about in greater detail. Massive magical showdown. Other things that happen in this book, Adam, who is one of the other Raven Boys characters, at the end of the prior book has basically sacrificed himself to Cabeswater. You'll recall that Cabeswater is the magical forest in the previous book, and he has basically agreed to become Cabeswater's like eyes and ears and hands out in the world, but Cabeswater starts taking over sort of more and more of his consciousness, and so he has to figure out a way to really still, you know, still do things for Cabeswater, but also retain more of his own, you know, identity and his selfhood and his ability to control his own thoughts and not have creepy things happening around him all the time because the force is trying to get his attention. Blue, who was previously sort of in kind of a relationship with Adam in the previous book, starts to have feelings for Gansey in this book, and the relationship between her and Adam starts to kind of fall apart, and you know, she has feelings for Gansey, but knows that she can never really do anything about it because of the whole prophecy about how if she kisses her true love, he'll die, and how she knows that Gansey's going to die and all that stuff that we talked about in the previous video. So another thing relating to Ronan and relating to his whole family is that we do actually discover how his dad died. And what we discover is that this concept of a something, nobody really knows what it is, and people mostly don't know it's a person, but this concept of the Greywarren, which is the magical thing that can take items out of your dreams, is something that people have been hunting for. And in some cases, really bad people have been hunting for it. And so this hitman, who we all just love, Mr. Grey, so like much character ever. Like, we adore Mr. Grey.
Yes. Everything about him.
Yeah, he's the best. He gets sent to Henrietta by one of these like bad collector dudes who's looking for the Greywarren. And so Mr. Grey is in Henrietta looking for the Greywarren. Initially doesn't know that it's actually a person, but knows that it's somehow related to the Lynch family. And we actually discover that he is the person who killed Ronan's dad. But because he thought that Ronan's dad, that they were in some way connected to the Greywarren, not knowing that Ronan's dad was himself the Greywarren, and that Ronan himself also is a Greywarren. And Mr. Grey starts to develop sort of a relationship with Blue's mom, Maura. And as he becomes more aware of what's going on in Henrietta, all the magic in Henrietta, and the fact that Ronan is actually the Greywarren, he starts to kind of have a change of heart about what his mission is there. So
now let us go ahead and talk about the cards that we have chosen that we feel particularly connect with this book. And we are going to start off with the Magician. I think it's pretty obvious from book 2 that this is meant to be Adam, because he is pretty much he pulls the card, right, of the tarot card when he's working with Persephone to try to get a better handle on how to connect with Cave's water. And so Persephone is having him work with tarot cards as a way to do this, as well as I believe a scrying bowl, right? But so this does come up where basically Adam exemplifies the magician. I feel like all of them also can exemplify the magician, because Persephone says to Adam at one point when he's kind of struggling and not knowing what to do to heal Cave's water because it's being depleted by Kavinsky's dream thieving. So Persephone says to Adam, being the magician is, seeing what's out there and making those connections. That's what it's about. And I feel like the characters, the other characters, Gansey, Blue, Ronan, they all do that in their own way. They all do that in their own way. And even in the beginning of the book, Gansey makes mention of, Glendower, he had a group of, magi that hung out with him and, wandered with him. And so, and he was making connections between like those wizards and Ronan and Blue, so that was what I thought of when I thought the magician. So Sarah, Heather.
Yeah, I totally agree. The whole connection of the magician with Adam is made super explicit in the book, and it is very much a sort of, he has basically sacrificed himself to Cabe's water, and Cabe's water wants to be able to use him, but what he has to learn to do is to be able to learn how to communicate with Cabe's water, because when it starts, the way that Cabe's water communicates with him is it makes creepy things happen, and it makes the electricity go out, and it makes creepy sounds appear around him and stuff like that. And it's all very, it affects the people around him too. And he doesn't know how to deal with it or control it. And so Persephone teaches him, using tarot cards and using scrying, how to basically discern what Cabe's water is asking him to do, so he can go out. He repairs ley lines by shifting rocks or changing around parts of the landscape and redirecting things so that Cabe's water can feed off of more energy. But he develops skills to be able to discern what it's telling him and what it is that he actually needs to do in order to make this relationship between him and Cabe's water work. So but I do think that it's totally true that the whole theme of Gansey kind of being aligned with Glendower and all of the people around him being aligned with this team of magicians that kind of makes things happen for him, definitely makes them all kind of representative of a magician.
And I also think with Adam, especially towards the end when he turns over the magician and Persephone's telling him, you are the magician, I think up until that point, not even with Cabe's water, but even without it, he's kind of been that person that lives his life like as if nothing is in his control, because he's poor, his father was abusive, he's always been that, I'm never going to be, unless I find Glendower, I'm never going to be able to get out of Henrietta, I'm never going to be able to do anything unless I go with Gainsey to this party and meet the right people, I'm never going to make connections on my own. He's failed to see that he is ultimately in control of his own life, regardless of the circumstances. And when he starts to make that connection with Cabe's water, that's when you really start to see him recognize that he is in charge of his own life.
Next one, we have the Chariot. Sorry if you can see the glare there. And so for me, the Chariot felt like Kavinsky versus Ronan. At the end of the novel, you have Kavinsky. He basically creates this fire dragon from his dream, and manifests it and lets it loose in real life to just wreak
Mhm.
havoc. And so to combat that, Ronan creates this, the night horror.
Yeah, what he calls a night horror.
What he calls a night horror, and unleashes that. And they go at it with each other. They go at it with each other, mimicking how basically Kavinsky and Ronan are at odds here, because they are the way they see cave water, the way they want to use cave water, just very different perspectives. Ronan wants to save Cape's water. He does not want to keep stealing, even though he is a Grey Warden. He doesn't want to keep doing that. And he respects Cape's water, and he respects the ley line. Whereas Kavinsky, he doesn't give a shit. He will take, and it doesn't matter to him. So that's what this card represented for me. I mean, Kavinsky basically says to Ronan, either you're with me or you're against me. So in the same way of the Chariot, it's like either, the two horses in the RWS, they're either going together and there's a focus and a force there that's more aligned, or if they go separate ways, then there's this pulling, right? And so I kind of felt like that was very much the dance between these two characters.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And then there's also, the other thing that is actually kind of going on here a little bit in the symbolism is that this whole concept of the red and the white dragon, like with whales, there's a whole thing in symbolism around whales and the sort of the red and the white dragon and Wales versus England and all that kind of stuff. So I don't have enough education to really go into that fully, but when you're thinking about Glendower, the whole red and white dragon thing definitely evokes that. But then, in this particular book, that symbolism is taken that step further in terms of that conflict between Kavinsky and Ronan, and it's really clear the way that the dragon and the night horror are described. Oops.
Yes.
That this is what that's depicting. One of it looks more sort of bird-like and really creepy, and that that's how the night horror is described. And the way it's described, it really too, it almost calls back to the Magician in a way, because initially when Ronan brings night horrors into the world, he's doing that, it's out of his control. It's something he does by accident. He accidentally, because he has all of these scary thoughts in his head that he can't control, he ends up pulling these terrifying deadly creatures out of his dreams. And so he'll wake up and there's one in his room, or there's one that is stalking them at the farm when they go visit the barns, which is where, which is his family farm. But when it ultimately comes down to this conflict with Kavinsky, he brings one in on purpose, and it's not like the black creepy ones that he had been bringing in before. Right. It's this different one. It's white. It looks different, and and it's more doing his bidding in a way. So it signifies him actually coming into his own almost as a magician figure and having more control over his inner world and his dreams and his thoughts. So
absolutely. The next card is the Temperance card. So Sarah, you had chosen this card. Did you want to speak to this image?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting because I actually, until my most recent reread of this book, and I've read this book 4 times, I think 4 or 5 times, I didn't actually get the Temperance card until my most recent reread, when I noticed this bit of symbolism and imagery in the book that I had never put it together before. And that is in the scene where Persephone is teaching Adam how to communicate with Cave's water. And it's very much about, Adam having to find this balance between the fact that he has willingly sacrificed himself to Cave's water. He has agreed to be Cave's water's eyes and hands out in the world, and he has agreed to kind of do Cave's water's bidding, but he also needs to know how to control how the force communicates with him, be able to communicate with it in a way that he can understand, and really kind of establish that balance between himself and Cave's water. And so in this scene, Persephone there's this imagery of a drop of water falling down into the scrying bowl that kind of is how she leads him on the journey of learning how to communicate with Cabe's water. And I didn't even like put it together that connection of the drop of water in that scene to this particular card until, like I said, my most recent reread. But
I hadn't either.
that I think is where this particular imagery for Temperance comes from. And I like, once I figured that out, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. So
the next card that we have is the Devil card. This card makes reference to the mask in the novel. So Ronan's father owned this mask, and Ronan has dreams about this mask, maybe one dream, I don't remember, but where Adam puts on the mask, and it's pretty horrific. The transformation that takes place with Adam, he becomes horrifying. Also, Persephone, when Persephone and Adam are trying to revive the ley line, Persephone does pull a card when they're in Cape's Water, attempting to just save Cape's Water, essentially. And it's the Devil card. And it's pretty clear that they know who the Devil card is referring to, and that is Kavinsky, because he's wreaking havoc.
I also think the Devil card, just in general anyway, but it's, you know, it speaks very strongly of Ronan because it talks about the mask that his dad owned and stuff. But I think there's also like a level of his sexuality in the card. Because I think for most of the book, although it's never explicitly dealt with, Ronan is very clearly in denial about his feelings for Kavinsky. And, you know, there's a moment where Gansey says, oh, you know, why doesn't he just admit that he's gay already, or whatever it is that he says? And Ronan is like, I wonder if he actually is, blah, blah, you know, and he has that whole, and their clash, he's obviously drawn to Kavinsky and he doesn't really understand why. And so I think the Devil very much represents Ronan quite strongly in this book for me. There's a lot of things. There's you know, his sexual urges, his homosexuality, his hidden repressed homosexuality, his desire to just go out and be crazy and race random people in the street and blow things up with Kavinsky and take drugs with Kavinsky. I think all of that is a side of him that he represses to an extent when he's with the rest of the group, and Kavinsky is the devil tempting him to let that side of himself out.
Well, and the other thing too about the mask and the symbolism of the mask and the way it works in Ronan's dream is that Adam puts the mask on in the dream, and the mask like grows into his face. Like,
it becomes his face.
It becomes his face. Like he once it takes him over, he can't take it off. And so it also just represents this fear of like, you know, once you give into those things, you lose all your control. You have no more ability to step back and say, no, that's not what I am. It's like once you give in, you're stuck, and that's who you become. And so that aspect of it too, you know, explains why there's that great fear. Yeah. On the part of Adam, on the part of Ronan. I mean, a lot of characters have these fears, but Adam and Ronan in particular, about if they just gave in, what they would be. You know, Adam has dreams of violence, and he's abused by his dad, and he has that fear of, like, he even, you know, he'll do things like even when he's fighting with Blue. I hope that this is in this book, but he'll, you know, knock something over and then suddenly realize, oh my God, I like just threw something against the wall, and I didn't even like feel myself doing it. You know, he just has these violent urges. And Ronan is the same thing, not just about his sexuality, but also his desires to just like go out there and wreak havoc and like do whatever crazy crap he wants to do. But there is that fear, if they give into that, of like what they will become as people. And so that the mask growing into the face, I think, is like real potent imagery.
Okay, so the next two cards that we're going to discuss, we're going to do it together because we feel they're related, and that would be the Tower card
Mhm.
and the 5 of Wands.
The 9 of Wands too,
And
right?
also the
And the
nine
9 of Wands, my bad, and the 9 of Wands. So 3, yes. So as you can see, there is a motif going on here. When I saw the Tower card, I thought, oh wow, substance party, man. This is substance party. They are throwing. So the substance party is basically a party that Kavinsky hosts, every 4th of July or
Mhm.
something like that. And essentially it is blowing up shit and taking substances.
Mhm.
And so Ronan and Gansey go to this substance party,
Mhm.
and well, I mean, it is pretty much what you're seeing here. They've created what are they called, Molotov cocktails
Mhm.
to throw, and they just blow shit up. And did they blow up the Mitsubishi again? I forget.
Well,
And
because Kavinsky has a whole bunch of those.
yeah, he has a whole bunch of them that he
He
just
just keeps taking them out of his dreams over and over and over again.
exactly. So and also for this particular scene, he actually hands the cocktail bomb to
Mhm.
Ronan to throw.
Mhm.
And so for me, that was very much a Tower moment, because it's like it's all blowing up.
Mhm.
And in a way, sort of speaking to what Heather was talking about in the previous card, in a way, it's this kind of release for Ronan. I
Mhm.
mean, the exhilaration that he feels, like giving in and letting go. And it's this just,
Mhm.
it's chaos. It's
Mhm.
chaos. And it's like the beginning.
Mhm.
It's this turning point for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have the
Yeah.
5 of Wands here and the 9 of Wands.
As 7 wise men in BTS once said, set everything on fire. Wow, wow, wow.
Fact. Does anybody want to speak to any or all of these cards?
It's interesting because there's like, the Tower shows the bonfire at the substance party, and then we have the 5 of Wands showing that fire
Mhm.
getting out of control,
Mhm.
and then we have the 9 of Wands. You can almost see these hands as Ronan's trying to hold on to the fire, but it's burning him too. Like
Mhm.
there's this point where it becomes out of your control, and you can't keep it contained. You can't hang on to it, and what Ronan ultimately has to do is really, recognize that Kavinsky is on this path of complete self-destruction and destruction of everything else, and just doesn't care, and doesn't care about Cave's water, and doesn't care about other people, and is just completely lashing out at the world. And Ronan has to make a choice to not. He can so easily go that same way, and he has a choice not to.
Right.
So it's not something that he can control, and it's not something that he can be a part of. It's something that he just has to completely let go of.
Yep. Kavinsky says either you're with me or you're against
Mhm.
me. And
Mhm.
And they are, aren't they? They're so similar, Kavinsky and Ronan. I mean, they're basically the same, and the only thing that really separates them is the decision that they made at the end. And also, Ronan has this really strong foundation with the rest of the group that Kavinsky is putting at risk if he chooses to go with Kavinsky. And Kavinsky has this one friend who it turns out is somebody that he created out of his dream. So they could have ended up the same way, but they just ultimately made different decisions.
the next card we have is the Star card.
This, I think, really directly calls back to one of my favorite scenes in the book, because I'm really into the whole Blue Gansey romance. Let's just put that out there now. I was pretty invested in Blue and Gansey. So anyway, there's this scene where the two of them go for a drive.
Yes, that's what I was thinking too. Yeah.
And they drive, up onto this road that's kind of high up in the hills, where they're overlooking the streets of Henrietta, or the lights of Henrietta, very much like this this card suggests, and that's where they finally sort of confess in a way that they're starting to have feelings for each other, but then there's also this recognition that they can't really do anything about it, and it's all very like fraught and teenage angsty romance, but also they're both feeling like exhilarated in a way, because they're learning that they feel this way about each other, and the way that it's all described is just very
it's a beautiful scene.
It's great. I mean, if you're into like the whole teen romance thing, and like it's good stuff. So
it is good stuff. I agree, and that's that was the thing that I was thinking of too. Yeah. So the next card is the Moon card, which we did discuss in the first video, but this does come up again in book 2. So Heather, did you have anything you wanted to speak to about this card?
Well, I just don't think you can talk about the Dream Thieves without including the Moon, like, ultimately.
Yeah.
It's a massive raven, and Ronan is repeatedly called the most raven of the Raven Boys, and he is somebody who is very connected to dreams and the shadowy side of stuff, which is ultimately what the Moon is all about. Has that perception of the world that's based around the fact that he can go into his dreams and pull things out of them.
Yeah, and just like again, that kind of wild dual nature that the Moon card can often represent, and how he has been leaning into that because he is with Kavinsky now. The next card I have is the 7 of Swords. And the reason that this card stood out to me as I was kind of flipping through the deck while reading this book is that I immediately thought of Mara and how she is just such a sly fox. Like so essentially when she meets Mr. Gray, and he is pretty upfront with the fact that he's a hitman. And so, Mara, she proceeds to, upon their first meeting when he leaves, she proceeds to steal his wallet so that he can sneak through. And she's just so approachable with him to begin with, to his face, and you would never know that she's like pickpocketed him. Yeah. Ironic, because like he's a hitman, so he's smooth himself, but he's like none the wiser to the fact that she's pickpocketed him and gotten the wallet. Then they actually go on a date, and they're again making out by the tree, and she strategically uses that moment to steal his cell phone. So look at his cell phone and see his contacts and what he's been up to. So I just thought that was, that's a nice play on the whole 7 of Swords and the kind of strategic cunning. And it's not, I think a lot of times the 7 of Swords is seen in a kind of negative light, but oftentimes I see it as being just very strategic. And yeah, she's doing shady shit, but she's doing it for a good reason.
Exactly.
To kill people. Yeah. So exactly. So that was my take.
It's interesting, because obviously the ladies of 300 Foxway, basically the second they meet Mr. Gray, kind of have his number, that like you're
something
that and with the knowledge that that what he's actually searching for is a person. It's Ronan. It's like, and obviously once he figures that out as well, he makes the decision that no, like I can't go through with this. I can't bring the Grey Warren to this evil collector guy who hired me to find it, because the Grey Warren is a kid, and I'm not going to hurt this kid. And so, he goes to try to so he ultimately is a good guy, but at the same time, like he's there in Henrietta for a bad reason. And so at the same time that Maura is attracted to him, and they're obviously very attracted to each other, she's also like, I'm not going to let you do any shady shit. So
exactly.
So she's fully like is ready to immerse herself in a relationship, but she's not going to like lose any kind of self-protective or protective of others kind of impulses. She's a mom, and she's going to take care of business. So yeah.
Exactly.
I also I love like when she steals his, I can't say cell phone, I can't bring myself to do it. When she steals his mobile phone,
fair enough.
I know it's cell phone in the book, but I just can't do it. Like that scene when they're around the table with the phone is one of my favorite scenes in the whole book, and it's so simple, but it's just that it like, so they bring Blue downstairs for help, and she goes to touch Calla.
Mm-hmm.
Because she thinks they want to do psychometry on the phone, and they're like, no, we just don't know how to get into his emails. and then he rings her, and she doesn't pick up. And when she rings him back, she's like, well, I'm not going to answer somebody else's phone. And it's just that, like, these women are so smart, and they're so switched on, but they also live kind of almost outside the real world most of the time. So when they're faced with like a real world issue, like accessing emails on a phone, they've got no idea. No idea whatsoever. And I just think it's a theme that really, really shows you their characters so well. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, that was a great scene. A great scene.
I'd totally forgotten about that. That's so funny. Which really gets at, I think, my absolute favorite thing about these books, and it's one of those things that I feel like is rare in fantasy, where you have this perfect collision of the fantastical and the mundane in a way where it makes the fantastical feel real.
Absolutely.
And that to me, I think, was the thing that grabbed me the most about all of these books, is that feeling of, these are these real people and they live in this real place. But like, the scene, it's the very, very beginning of the book where they're flying the little airplane that doesn't have batteries in it. And the whole scene ends with, I think it's Blue thinking to herself, magic is real, magic is real, magic is real. Just that exhilarating feeling of knowing that magic is real. And it's because Maggie Stiefvater does such a great job of creating this mundane world around it that you can feel that exhilaration of knowing that magic is also real in this world. And that's one of the things that I love the most about these books. And
no, I couldn't agree.
That Heather brought up, like, totally gets at that, which I think is really cool.
We love you, Maggie Stiefvater. We love you. If you're watching this ever.
Oh, good.
And the next card is the Ten of Swords.
Well, this is another one, isn't it? Like The Magician, where it's very explicit in the book that this card is Mr. Grey, to the point that they say it. He refers to himself as the Ten of Swords sometimes, and they refer to him as the Ten of Swords sometimes. After he's drawing his cards and things, and ultimately he isn't the one that's betrayed. He is the one that does the betraying, because he was there for a very specific purpose. He was there to find what turns out to be Ronan and hand it over to his boss. And he lies to his boss. And ultimately stabs his boss in the back for the right reasons. And throughout the book, it's almost implied that he is the one that's going to be the guy on the ground. And ultimately he ends up being the knife in the back.
Yeah.
But again, for the right reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, he is to an extent the guy on the ground too, though. I mean, when you think about the fact that the Ten of Swords always represents the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new cycle. Mr. Grey is a hitman, and I think the next book goes a little bit more into his background and how he grew up and his brother and all that kind of stuff. But he himself has developed this total persona that lacks any kind of content whatsoever, basically. Like he's Mr. Grey because he's gray. Like, he's gray colored. He doesn't stand out in any way. He doesn't like have a place in the world, really. He's made himself this completely anonymous character, right, in order to do his job correctly, and also in order to hide from people who he is hiding from, like his brother. But when he gets to Henrietta, it's the first time that he sees a place where he thinks he can make a home for himself and starts to feel like he wants a new beginning as a person and almost become a real person in a way, become a real person who belongs somewhere, who has relationships, who isn't just this anonymous persona that he has cultivated as a hitman. And so, you know, when you think of the Ten of Swords as being like hitting that low point, and in this case, he's hit this low point of realizing, oh my God, my employer has me hunting a child. This is awful. And then making a decision, I'm actually going to start over and like try to live my life in a different way from how I've been living my life. And, you know, ultimately it doesn't quite work out in the way that he's hoping, but it really it's that point where he makes a decision that he wants to be different. And so it really does in a way represent that kind of end of a cycle, beginning of a new cycle that you get in the Ten of Swords sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Excuse me, there's a point where when Mara pulls out that card and she says, you're going to need to be brave. And he's like, I am brave. And she's like, you're going to need to be braver than that. And I think this book really shows that because this book does touch on his brother and the relationship that they had, where it's his older brother, right? His older brother was essentially a sociopath.
Yeah,
and
like serial killer.
Physically tortured Mr. Grey when they were children. I mean, horrible things that are alluded to in the novel. And when Mr. Greenmantle, the one who's hired Mr. Grey to find the Grey Warren, when Mr. Greenmantle realizes that Mr. Grey is going to betray him, he sets off to get some dirt on Mr. Grey and essentially locates the brother. And so now, because Mr. Grey has been hiding from his brother, he has feared his brother his whole life. And so now, not only is Mr. Grey trying to, he wants a life in Henrietta. He wants a place. And so he is reaching his most frightened point because he knows now the brother is after him. He's betrayed his boss. He's on the run. He's basically making himself into the bait and saying that he has the Grey Warren and he's going to be the bait to be off on the run while to protect Ronan. And essentially at the end, I mean, he's able to conquer that by actually murdering his brother. Final two cards. We have the 4 and the 5 of coins. The roses, those make up the coins suit. So all the cards are rose related. And we do see the motif of roses in book 2 with Mr. Grey and also with Adam. So with Mr. Grey, this is earlier in the novel when he is searching for the Grey Warren, and he's using EMF detectors to try to locate, and essentially it leads him to this rose bush that is, I guess it's in bloom and yet actively dying because it's bright in its bloom, but yet you see rot. As a result of what's happening to Cabeswater. So, and then with Adam, there is a point where he's in Cabeswater with Persephone, and he's trying to mend Cabeswater, revive the ley lines. And there is one point where he spots a dying rose. And he has to unearth that rose and essentially kill it to be able to get to the stone that he needs to get to as part of repairing the ley line.
It's basically this motif of roses being the sort of canary in the coal. Like, it's the roses growing on the ley line that show that the ley line is sick, basically. And it's something that Mr. Grey sees, this weird rose bush that's dying, and it's all because, again, of Kavinsky sucking the ley line dry and sucking Cabeswater dry with all of the magic that he's using to bring 100 Mitsubishis out of his dreams, so and design and amazing, fireworks and stuff like that. So yeah, it's the dying roses really represent that kind of rot at the heart of things that Kavinsky is causing.
And that is it. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for book 2. We will be back with book 3 some months down the line. The next book in the series is called Blue Lily, Lily Blue, I believe. So we will be back to talk about that. So what did you think about book 2? What do you think about the tarot deck? Let us know in the comments below. And until the next time, much love and take care.